I want to talk about the Supergirl TV series. Much like The Last Jedi and Captain Marvel, by virtue of having a white woman as the lead, a lot of criticism against Supergirl is just thinly veiled sexism. But also like The Last Jedi and Captain Marvel, Supergirl contains racist and inappropriate messages that often get overlooked as a result of the supposed progressiveness of a white woman lead. So I wanted to address some of those aspects, and to illuminate why, despite the progressiveness it and its fans claim to have, it is actually rather regressive when it comes to discussing race, sexuality, gender, and politics. But before I can do that, I need to go to the beginning, and I'm talking way back. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster debuted Superman back in Action Comics #1 in June 1938, but he wasn't the only one that they debuted. Lois Lane, star reporter, was not an obligate heterosexual love interest. She was a character in and of herself, dynamic, complex, motivated, virtuous, and hilarious. She subverted every expectation that audiences had for women during the golden age of comics. I've talked about her before in my video on Mary Jane Watson, but it really cannot be overstated how progressive she truly was. She was a woman in a male-dominated field, adamant that the chauvinism she faced wouldn't deter her. Based on Elizabeth Cochran, better known by her pen name as Nellie Bly, Lois changed the world for the better. In her own miniseries by Siegel and Shuster, Lois regularly saved herself through the use of her wits and her athleticism, and took on stories her male co-workers were too distracted to take seriously. Lois Lane was so successfully a change of pace that Siegel and Shuster planned to interrupt their own status quo early in their run by having Lois discover Clark's secret identity, thus giving him a partner on equal footing. This was overruled by the editorial staff. The duo left DC following their underhanded practices of stealing stories from them, and it would be a long time before canon Lois became Clark's official partner. But times changed. In 1954, Dr. Fredric Wertham published the book Seduction of the Innocent. This book correlated, most likely erroneously, juvenile delinquency with comics, taking issue not only with crime and horror comics, which he believed promoted violence and theft. He also fearmongered that Superman was un-American, Wonder Woman was a lesbian, and Batman and Robin were gay. Yep, he's where that came from. Okay, actually, to be fair, he got that from gay people that he interviewed. Which, whoever you are, if you ship Batman and Robin, that's disgusting and shameful. Given that American Congress in the 1950s generally agreed on crime, authority, and sexuality, they encouraged the comics industry to change their ways. Thus, the Comics Code Authority was formed. Though most comic content could still be published in the majority of the states, to get the stamp of approval and thus support from wealthy advertisers and retailers, they had to submit and pass the Comics Code. Judge Charles F. Murphy was given control of the code, and his personal influence, more than once, limited comics beyond censoring graphic content. Now, some of these rules did make sense, especially when it came to creating content accessible by children. No graphic rape scenes or pornographic content. Some rules were just kind of ridiculous. No use of the words horror or terror in the title, and no werewolves. Other rules were actually, though, designed to keep marginalized individuals quiet and support current power structures. Cops and justice systems weren't allowed to be portrayed negatively. Gay characters were forbidden. And famously, Judge Murphy tried to strong-arm EC Comics into changing Al Feldstein and Joe Orlando's Judgment Day, a story about racism in an alien robot community, in which it's revealed that the futuristic heroic astronaut from a utopian society is a black man. Murphy insisted that EC change the astronaut to be white. This would presumably not have been Wertham's intention, as he was actually quite the civil rights activist. He opened a low-cost psychiatric clinic in Harlem for poor black people. He worked closely with Richard Wright in bringing psychiatric healthcare to Harlem, and was supported by people like Ralph Ellison, Paul Robeson, and other notable pillars in the Harlem community. His work on studying the effects of segregation was even influential in the overturning of Brown v. the Board of Education. Of Wertham, Wright once said, quote, "Wertham's attitude is that psychiatry is for everybody or none at all," end quote. It's a shame that his most remembered aspect of his work is his work that, with little proof, and indeed little call for censorship, beyond asking creators to consider what they make, was put into effect over an entire industry. A man's entire career striving for good has been reduced to a joke, which is unfortunate. But anyways, the damage was done, and thus began the Silver Age. risks were a lot less common. Superman wouldn't fight the KKK. Etta Candy wouldn't use a box of chocolates to take down a camp full of Nazis. And Lois Lane wouldn't confront corrupt politicians. In fact, Lois Lane probably suffered the most in terms of DC's big hitters. Sure, Batman was made much campier, but Lois went from a dedicated, hands-in-the-dirt reporter to a lovesick maniac. Gone were the days of uncovering racketeering rings and taking down mob bosses. Here were the days where Lois would end up plus-size for an issue, or a baby, or black. Yeah, a lot of the Silver Age sucked. But while the orders to respect authority impacted the Superman line of books, Batman was most impacted by the rumor that he and Robin were gay. As a result of this, and not wanting to have a gay lead character, even though the main problem should obviously be that it would be pedophilic if it was true, editor Jack Schiff requested that Edmund Hamilton and Sheldon Moldoff introduce a heterosexual love interest for the Caped Crusader. Thus, the first Batwoman was introduced in 1956. Nothing like today's Jewish lesbian cousin of Bruce Wayne, this Batwoman was at least not entirely terrible. Sure, she sometimes needed rescuing by Batman and sometimes engaged in stereotypical behavior, but she was actually fighting crime, and a hero in her own right. What's more is that she was successful with audiences. Batwoman showed that feminine counterparts to masculine superheroes could be successful, and in 1958, DC tested the waters with a Supergirl. This one had her name hyphenated. Now, this story was a mess. It had racist stuff about Native American, very specific there, guys, magic that translates into broken English, Lois Lane being jealous of an underage girl spending time with Superman, and Supergirl repeatedly messing up and having Superman have to correct her mistakes. This version was created by Jimmy wishing on mystical native totems, and is wished away in the same way to spare her a horrible death from kryptonite. However, for all of its flaws, fans didn't hate the concept of there being a Supergirl. So, 9 months later, in 1959, the Supergirl that we're here to talk about appeared. Kara Zor-El, the last daughter of Krypton. This version of the character, created by Otto Binder and Al Plastino, was Superman's cousin, a citizen of Argo City, one of 2 cities to survive the destruction of Krypton. However, unlike Kandor, Argo faced a second apocalypse. So, while Kara was raised with her birth family, she lost them in her adolescence. But by coming to Earth, she meets her long-lost cousin and becomes his secret weapon, under the secret identity of Linda Lee, as she tries to adapt to her new powers and the process of growing up. Supergirl was actually very popular upon her introduction, and she remained a staple for 2.5 decades. She aged almost relative to the time passing in the real world, which meant that she got to have a lot of varying adventures throughout the Silver and Bronze Age. She joined the Legion of Superheroes, got a superpowered cat, made friends, found an adoptive family in the Danvers that loved her, and she saved both the world and Superman semi-regularly. After she graduated high school, she moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a camera operator, which is an interesting choice for an occupation for a superhero. And then eventually she became a student advisor, which, again, is pretty cool. Later changes included reuniting with her old family, meeting new enemies and new friends, and of course, new adventures. She was actually one of the most important characters in the DC universe, so, inevitably, you see, I know the truth. I remember all that happened, and I'm not going to forget. Worlds lived. Worlds died. Nothing will ever be the same. Marv Wolfman's 1986 epic, Crisis on Infinite Earths, was the biggest event in DC Comics history, bigger than any single character premiere, and bigger than any previous crossover. Big events in continued continuities often include the death of a major character to illustrate the changes in the universe being serious. Eventually this became cliched, and now characters will be dead for less than a few months, but at the time, death was serious, or, at the very least, more serious. So, who would Wolfman kill? Well, he set a rule for himself not to kill any character that was created before he was born in 1946. So, the most popular character in that case might be the Flash, for one. But he also had a different goal. See, Crisis on Infinite Earths was meant to condense the multiverse into one single continuity, with titles going forward being the definitive editions of characters, the single edition of the character. Wolfman sought to correct the course from his opinion, in some ways, and one way that he did this was with regards to the Superman supporting characters. The editors at DC, as well as Wolfman, wished to redirect the Superman mythos, refocusing on making Clark the last son of Krypton. Now, I personally would argue that in finding Kandor and Krypto and Kara and Karen, Clark has evolved past the point where he was a loner into a man seeking to find cultural ties to his diaspora. But, much like Jeff Johns and Joe Quesada after him, Wolfman and his friends wanted to revert a character out of his growth to what was cool back when they were kids. As such, following Crisis, Superman would be the only surviving Kryptonian. This meant that Power Girl was retconned to be an Atlantean, Krypto was retconned to be just a normal dog, and Zod was relegated to a pocket universe. And Kara Zor-El, by DC Vice President Dick Giordano's wishes, was killed. In Wolfman's defense, Kara's death is far from poorly executed. She dies saving the universe and her cousin. She deals the strongest blows to the Anti-Monitor, the event's main villain, and she's mourned by DC's greatest heroes and treated with respect, given a nice eulogy by her best friend, Batgirl. While Giordano didn't really seem to like Supergirl much, if a character has to die, this is one of the good ways to do it, and Wolfman has admitted that he too misses Kara. Less good, though, was the limited time frame for mourning. Following Crisis on Infinite Earths, the DC Universe was rebooted, and everything beforehand was forgotten, save by a very few number of individuals. This meant that Batgirl and Superman authors weren't allowed to write their characters experiencing grief over Kara's death, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of dealing with death in comics and in storytelling in general. Still, while Kryptonians were off limits, this didn't stop writers from introducing new Supergirls. Matrix, a protoplasmic alien robot, was the first Supergirl after the Crisis, and she merged with the biological daughter of the Danvers, who was also named Linda, but wasn't Kryptonian. This Supergirl was born a human, but Matrix's merging with her converted her to an angel. Somehow. I don't really understand it. And finally, there was Cir-El, a human girl manipulated by Brainiac into thinking that she was Clark and Lois's Kryptonian daughter from the future. This doesn't mean that pre-Crisis Kara never appeared again. She actually made an appearance in a Dead Man comic that was actually quite touching, and Linda tried to save pre-Crisis Kara, but was ultimately unable to, leading to her superhero retirement. But, in 2004, a new Kara Zor-El would appear. Still a cousin of Superman, she would have been sent off Krypton before Kal-El, but arriving several years after his debut as Superman. Many things that were adapted were changed for the better, many others for the worse. She was still a teenager this time around, and more stories could be told about a teenage girl in the 2000s than in the 60s, when she was originally a teen. That did, however, mean that characters that were once her peers were now her elders. While Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, had been her best friend in the superhero community, she was now an adult with adult responsibilities. Dick Grayson went from a little brother to a big brother. On the other hand, this meant that she was able to become closer to characters like Stephanie Brown and Tim Drake. She was also retconned from Linda Danvers to Linda Lang, an adoptee of Superman regular Lana Lang, and she became a journalist like her cousin. Stereotypical, but whatever. Story aside, there was something that was a definite downside: her design. Kara's earliest appearances were quite modest, and as she matured, she displayed more openness with her style and body, but when she was a teenager, she was displayed respectfully. However, Kara's Supergirl in post-Crisis continuity is often sexualized and objectified. Let me reiterate that she's a minor. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong or sexual about bare midriffs or short skirts, obviously. However, many artists would frame her chest and rear close to the panel's point of view, and often as the focus of a panel. In interest of good taste, I will not display any of this artwork, but reference Cry for Justice and some of Michael Turner's work on the character to see what I mean. Furthermore, her body proportions were often ridiculous, with waists almost as thin as her neck. Other artists did better. Jamal Igle gave her biker shorts underneath her skirt, which was awesome, as it was both practical and tasteful. And then there was the New 52. Kara, like almost everyone, was rebooted, with a new alien-looking design. It showed off a lot of skin, but it at least felt like it was supposed to be foreign and bizarre. This version was another adoptee of the Danvers, only she kept the name Kara in her civilian life. If Kara Danvers sounds familiar to you, you're not alone. This Supergirl was a bit angrier, like many New 52 editions, fighting Superman upon their first meeting and eventually becoming a Red Lantern. What about DC Rebirth? Well, that was mostly inspired by the CW show Supergirl. Oh, right. So, in 2012, following the massive success of their Smallville series, the CW network set out to create a television show based around the hero Green Arrow. To do this, they hired Andrew Kreisberg, who now has 19 people accusing him of sexual harassment, Greg Berlanti, whose personal brand could best be described as making shows where adults pretend that they are minors so that other adults can legally pretend that they are watching minors in sexual situations, and Mark Guggenheim, who I guess is, comparatively good. I don't know anything horrible about him, so, compared to the other two. Anyways, they made Arrow, a mixed bag of a show that seems to think it's about Batman, and has gone for 7 years without making Oliver Queen, the most famous socialist superhero, a socialist. Still, while Arrow ranges from good to bad, it did revitalize the interest in live-action DC television. It's probably what we have to thank for shows like Titans, Black Lightning, and Doom Patrol, and it directly span off into the dependently decent show The Flash, the sadly short but still fun Vixen, the absolutely crazy spiritual successor to the Silver Age at DC, Legends of Tomorrow, and the awkward, if well-intentioned, The Ray. But, of course, I'm here to talk about its third official spin-off, Supergirl. In 2014, Warner Brothers commissioned Kreisberg, Berlanti, and Ali Adler to make a Supergirl TV show, and I'll get into it next time. Thank you for watching. I never ask for subscribers, and this isn't what I'm doing here, but what I'm saying is that if you enjoyed this video, there will be future parts to it. It'll take a while, so make sure you check back in a bit if you want to see more about Supergirl. Also, if you like my comic book content, let me recommend that you check out Born Medicated, a channel on YouTube that looks at comic history, content, and meaning through a unique lens. He's currently going through a retrospective on Alan Moore's Lovecraftian trilogy that I definitely recommend, though given the content matter, it's not quite for the faint of heart. Please leave a comment if you have any suggestions about what I should cover in the coming seasons of Supergirl in these reviews. Thanks again.